Okay, so Shabbat Shalom. For those of you who are joining us on YouTube, welcome to another Midrash Rabbah 2.0 with After His Heart Ministries. I'm Rabbi Q. This is Deborah, and we are in Vayishlach. So basically, we need to talk about God, why God hates Esau, and what that means. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and discuss some other things along the way. So just to kind of recap this week's parasha, Jacob has left Laban and is now going to connect with Esau. He is doing some very peculiar things in that process of preparation for that. Separating out the families, separating the wives from the concubines, separating the children of the loved wife from the children of the unloved wife, etc. In that principle, there are some curious things that he does that would appear to be still very shady and would still have that kind of that heel grabber type of sentiment. So I think a couple things that we probably need to get into is what we have kind of established already with Jacob is that he has agreed to covenant with Yahweh, whereas Isaac did not demonstrate an action of covenant with Yahweh, and Abraham did not demonstrate an action of covenant with Yahweh. Jacob did. And we did establish last week that Jacob had done actions to establish his covenantal relationship with Yahweh, or with the intensification of all power in the universe, as he was able to perceive or understand him. So I think a couple of things right off the bat that we need to get into is obviously this person who he wrestles, who he sends to Esau and why, and then probably we need to get a little bit into the Haftarah portion, but also I think we probably need to get into Malachi a little bit. So I think it's Malachi. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Malachi. Either way, we'll find it. Okay, so let's start at the beginning and let's establish some things. First of all, one of the things I think we need to do is go ahead and check and see if we have any questions. Do we have questions?
We have one.
We have one. Okay. So let's start there with the question then. But before we address that question, so the people who are in the Zoom room right now, do you have anything to share before we get started? Because of course I want to give everybody a voice before my voice. We'll have Rabbi's Nuggets at the end of the day, but really right now I would rather people just take time to share their thoughts or opinions or questions about the parasha, Vayishlach. And if nobody has any questions, then we will go ahead and move forward. And if you want, you can unmute and say, I don't have any questions. Okay, so I've given people a little bit of time to find the mute button, and I feel like nobody's really going to speak up. So we'll just go ahead and move on to the first question, which is what?
What is the significance of being two camps?
Two camps. Okay. So that's actually in last week's parasha, but it does have significance in this week's parasha. And so in principle,
it's in chapter 7, and then again in chapter
mean verse?
Yeah, I'm sorry, verse 7 and then verse 11 as well.
Okay. But what I mean is the explanation is in last week's verse.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and do some screen sharing just to basically keep everybody kind of on the same page. That way I can kind of control the version that we're using, et cetera, et cetera. You can follow along in whatever version you're using, but I use specific versions for specific reasons at certain times. Okay, so stepping right into the parasha in now it says in verse 1 of Genesis 32, and by the way, the parasha starts in Genesis 32:3, says, now Jacob went on his way, the angels of God met him. Okay. And when he saw them, Jacob said, this is God's camp. So he named that place Mahanaim, which means what? Two camps. So that's in last week's parasha. So I think one of the things that we should discuss is why did he call it two camps? Okay. So I tell you what, why don't we just stop there in the share and ask that question? Does anybody have any idea why they would call it two, why the Torah would call it two camps? Why did Jacob name it two camps?
Well, he may have named it two camps just because that's when he split everybody into two camps. But
Okay.
I still don't understand the significance of being two camps.
Okay. Does anybody else have any opinions out there? Just go ahead and unmute and you can speak. You don't have to raise your hand or anything.
Well, wasn't the reason that he divided them? He kind of divided them, for lack of a better word, into a class. You know, he put the concubines and the lesser women and children to the front, and he put Rachel and is it Leah?
Yeah.
The sister and their children further in the back. And so if Esau was to attack them, those would be the first to go versus the others might be able to get away. Then that was the whole purpose of splitting the camp.
Okay.
So it was more for protection and
right. So two things that are important. Number one is that there is a difference between the word company and the word camp. In the English, but in the Hebrew, it's the same word. I'll show you what I mean by that. And so then you will understand something. You'll understand something from that perspective. I mean, there's a number of other things we need to get into here. So he says, so this is last week's parasha, Machanaim, right? So that is this word in the Hebrew, Machanaim, from the word Machaneh, from the word Chaneh, to decline, incline, encamped, bend down, lay siege against. And of course, that is coming from the word chanan, which is to be gracious, which is something that a lot of people don't understand about the word grace. This word chanan, to decline or incline, encamp or bend down or lay in siege, is actually also the word for grace. There's no difference in the spelling. Chana is grace. Okay, so what we need to talk about here is why is that the concept of a camp, right? And why does the Torah in the English separate camp and company, right? So on this one here in verse 7, we have the same word, machanot, but it's going to also come from chana, which is also going to come from chanan, right? And so it's actually the same word. However, something interesting has occurred. What is it? Well, this is in a feminine ending, right? And this is in the special ayim ending, which is actually a dual ending, which means it's not more than two. So how many companies did he separate here? It says he separated two companies. And what's interesting is it's that lishne right here, lishne, which is what? From the word shanim, which is the word two in Hebrew, shanim, or shane, the dual of, or the second, okay? So lishnim right here, this word and this word together make up two camps, but it has the proper feminine ending, because when you pluralize a Hebrew word that has a hey at the end of it, you use a feminine ending, not a masculine ending. However, this one up here has a dual ending, not a masculine ending, but a dual ending. So what's interesting is this one basically says two camps in the word itself as a dual set, whereas this one down here in verse 7 actually uses the number two and the feminine ending for the word. So before we go any further, I think it's important that we ask the question, why did Torah do this? Why, on the one side, do we have the Hebrew dual ending, which is tied to the word, and on the other side, we have the number two and the feminine plural ending?
Two sets of wives. He's got the concubines in the front and the wives in the back.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other thoughts?
And in verse, is it verse 1 or verse 2? I couldn't tell.
Verse 2.
In verse 2, maybe he's not exactly talking about the two sets of wives. He's talking about God's camp and his camp.
Okay.
So, because it says this is God's camp, is it the same word? Just not
or company.
For company.
Or company, but truly it's camp, right? I mean, that's one thing that you guys probably need to know is it has to do with that tent wall that goes around in a circle and surrounds the entire camp, as a matter of all the tents being connected to each other so that there's a barrier between the outside of the camp and the inside of the camp. And the walls touch each other in order to form an entire wall around the camp, which consequently is grace. Okay. So
what does he mean by that? If the concept is of one camp is the tents in a circle, maybe I should do it so people can, isn't he talking about another circle outside of the camp? So he's got a double hedge of protection.
Okay. So one of the things that we need to get into, we've discussed a little bit last week, and I'll just go ahead and share my screen here really quick and discuss this with you guys and show you this. Okay. So number one, I want you to remember that the sages at large do make and I'll just show myself for real quick here. I can't get any bigger. It's okay. they do make a distinction between the Septuagint and the Hebrew scrolls, right? Okay, so the reason this is so important is because the Septuagint, okay, when we look at this first verse in chapter 32 of last week's parasha, and we go down to the Septuagint, you will find that they say here that he met angeloi. Okay, we'll go ahead and jump into this. From the word angelos, a messenger or envoy who is sent. And then all of a sudden it jumps over to an angel of God. Well, let's talk about this. Angelos, okay, is made up of a gaio, which is a somewhat of a preposition, but it means to go in front of or lead, right? So there will always be kind of a following. And then angele means herd or oxen or company. And the idea was basically a follower, as it were. However, this is definitely our word in the Greek for angel. Okay. In fact, it is literally a transliteration, but it is a replacer in the Septuagint for malach. Okay. Malach. So what I would like to do is chat with you guys a little bit. We talked about this a little bit last week, but I want to chat a little bit longer about agency. Okay. So first and foremost, what I would like to do is basically ask a question. If you were to really search your heart and you were to really look around you, look around your land, search your heart and find evil, where will you find it, no matter what? And I'm not talking about the wound. I'm not talking about the Hebrew understanding of the twisted rope. I'm talking about just the general Christian sentiment of evil. Because one of the things that we definitely would agree upon is that Christianity at large believes in a combination of about maybe 5 different evils, okay? Satan himself, or Lucifer, right? Hell and anything contained therein, demons as fallen angels, okay? Basically like malevolent energy or evil, and then humans. Question is how many of those are constructs that are behind what I would like to call the stealing of your religion, and how many of those are actually biblical theology from the century when Yeshua was here on the earth? Because one of the things that we need to probably get our minds wrapped around is how much Greek and Norse mythology has made it into our religion, and therefore the stories thereof, versus how much is actually true Jewish theology from the first and second century that would align more with what the rest of the Bible, which most Christians choose to ignore, says about it. Okay. Now, the reason I bring this up is because my question was, if we truly search for it, where do we actually find evil? let's say that we just take the 19th, or I'm sorry, we just take the 20th century. Okay. So from the 1900s to the year 2000, what evils can we definitively describe as identified, provable, tangible evil? Well, let's start with World War One, right? That would probably be a good place to start because World War One had a lot of evils in it. Okay. And then we have World War Two. And really, truly, the only thing that we really have in between is maybe what prohibition and an up and coming surge of mob style gangs in the cities, but not really anything beyond that that I can think of right off the bat. Can you? In between World War One and World War Two. Anybody out there, obviously you can unmute and ask this as well, or join us in this discussion. Okay. And so then World War II, and what
The
do we find?
Depression.
Yeah, what's that?
The Depression.
The Depression. Okay. And again, so yeah, I'll go with the Depression. We can call that evil.
Well, not so much just the Depression, but what that would have caused people to do. It would have caused people to do more stealing.
Yeah, more criminal
criminal
activity, self-preservation, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And then what we have World War II, and we have the atrocities of World War II. And then we start to move into the Cold War, where we encounter a huge, what we would call evil, because I'm just going to say that I find that no matter how you justify the preservation of your nation, Nagasaki and Hiroshima were evil. Okay. They were mass killings or massacres, a massive unaliving of humans. Okay. And then, of course, moving into, say, maybe the 60s and 70s, we get into Korea and then Vietnam, right? And I will tell you, there's a lot of Western civilization things going on too. The Soviet Socialist Republic, the Berlin Wall. Trying to think of any other evils that you really come up with that were present within the definitions of our history from 1900 until 2000. Of course, we've got Desert Storm. We've got the a couple of the things like the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I know I'm mentioning America. I should probably come up with some more worldview stuff. But then we have kind of some crazy stuff going on where we start to get into like the 80s and 90s. We start to get into some like evil financial empires, right? But what is common to all of them? Hitler was an agent of evil, right? And listen, I'm hesitant to call people out, but I think that we need to necessarily understand the mechanism of evil. There is not some weirdo running around in red pajamas with a pointed tail and a pitchfork. There are humans doing very, very bad things. And that's it. You can't go to a place on earth and find evil unless a human's present. And most likely, the evil that's present there is some form of control, self-preservation, or worse, right? Somebody who's in a very unhealthy state of ego, trying to control their environment so thoroughly that they begin to try to eliminate the threats to their environment violently. But truth be told is no matter how we go through it, messengers or agents are humans. Okay. Now, last week we discussed things like, for example, how does an agent, right, an ungulos in the Septuagint, pop out of a fire? Remember Manoah, Samson's father? Dude's burning the chaff at the threshing floor, and all of a sudden something pops out the fire and says, hey, you're going to have a kid, and he's going to be a Nazarite his whole life from the day he's born. And Manoah's like, yeah, I don't buy it. He doesn't say, whoa, dude, you're not supposed to pop out of the fire. What are you? He just communicates with it, right? And so there are some things that I can say, that we don't understand about this, but I can tell you of my own experience in having a pretty extensive anthropological, not only education, but history. The study of civilization will constantly produce one true factor, that the problem with humanity is humanity and no other entity. And so the question is, when it says in the Hebrew that Jacob met Malachim, we have to let go of I'm going to share with you my version of angel will never not be the Van Halen record cover with the cherub smoking the cigarette. I have no idea why, but that's where my brain goes every time. We don't have these babies with wings running around and playing harps, okay? It is something else. And I'm going to propose to you that I'm of the opinion that they are anointed beings. Now, I'm cautious with this, but I can tell you that in my experience, there is something different about the anointed versus the ones who are not anointed, and that some are anointed for evil. And if you want to understand that, go read Second Kings. I think it's Second Kings. It might be First Kings. I think it's Second Kings. Second Kings chapter probably 3 or something like that, where Elijah goes and anoints a pagan king and says to that pagan king exactly the things that he's going to do. In fact, I think Elijah weeps about it. He's so sad that he has to anoint this king because this king is going to do horrible things. And the king even asked him, am I a dog that I would do such things? And sure enough, he ends up doing those things. Anyway, so the point being is that it is possible that agency is actually an anointing. So then we start to get into the question of, if we were to lean in the direction of harp playing, crown, sword bearing, supernatural realm fighting individuals, then we could understand why Jacob makes a distinction between Jacob's camp and the Lord's army, right? But if we turn around and say that these are messengers, but then Jacob turns around and names it, he says, this is God's camp, right? Or this is God's company. But then he turns around and names it two or the dual ending camps. Then we should probably accept that whatever distinction was made between the things that were in this camp versus Jacob's camp, we have some pretty powerful questions we need to ask. The first of which is although Jacob has the favor and prosperity of abundance, does he have protection? So that would be my first question is, are these angels here to protect him? So who are Jacob's enemies? Let's talk about that for a moment. Who is an opponent of Jacob? Who is somebody who has been prevented from harming Jacob?
Esau.
Okay. Anybody else?
Well, Lavan was prevented.
Lavan. Okay. So how was Lavan prevented?
Well, he tried to stop Jacob on several occasions, and even by withholding Rachel from him to begin with, and then switching his pay and stuff like that. We see that happening.
So it's actually in last week's parasha where Lavan says, I had a dream and I can neither speak evil nor good of you. In other words, Lavan had to hold his tongue, but what's interesting is he's not allowed to bless him, but he's not allowed to curse him either. Mm-hmm. And I would propose that that is probably because that is not who needs to bless Jacob. That's not who needs to give Jacob the blessing. Okay. But we'll get into that. So the next thing, and this is an important one, is that whoever these Malachim are, Jacob makes a distinction between who they are versus who his camp is. Any opinions about that? Should we lean in the direction of these winged, sword-bearing, crown-wearing harp players, or should we lean in the direction of something more like, say, a school or a camp of prophets, or a school or camp of, say, maybe kings, or a school or camp of, say, priests? Because that's the only anointing that exists: a king, a priest, or a prophet. And so, in principle, what we need to really look at is, what does it take to become a malach? So our first question is there, or are there, entities who are not human, who are part of the human process, either for the good or for the bad? Because we know the angel of the Lord has stood as Satan to destroy Balaam when he was going to curse Israel with the king of Moab, Balak. So I guess my question to you would be, are we going to lean in this direction or that direction or both? And my next question would be, is this two camps a distinction because Jacob knew better than to mix them? And then we need to ask the question, why? Okay.
I lean in the direction that they're both. I believe that people can definitely be messengers of God that come into your life. I mean, there's a scripture that says, be careful of how you treat people, because you could be entertaining angels unaware, right? So I do believe that it could definitely be both. Do I think that it is humans in this circumstance? I don't know. It definitely could be, but it definitely could be the sword-bearing kind as well. It would lean more towards, I think it would lean more towards it being humans and them surrounding him.
So when this particular ministry was just on Zoom, and it was just basically people whom I had invited who were kind of my friends, and I had met on TikTok because originally the board of directors for After His Heart Ministries had wanted some sort of outreach into social media. And so then we basically decided TikTok was the appropriate platform. And so I ended up making some friends, and they started coming in, and that kind of became the core congregation. But the reason that I bring this up is because when we originally were just on Zoom and not broadcasting to YouTube, we were midrashing the parashas on a regular basis after sometime during the week, and not in connection with my teachings. So I would do a teaching on Shabbat, but we would midrash the parasha maybe Friday night, Wednesday night. There were times where we did it at different times, but we established that whatever was standing over Jerusalem when David actually builds an altar and intervenes in the plague against Jerusalem had to be a pretty tough cat. But it's important that we be careful, because although there appears to be some descriptive type of beings present in the throne room of God in Ezekiel, those aren't angels. And people all the time want to connect cherubim with angels, or connect Ophanaim with angels, or they want to connect. So they go through the list of these things that are in Ezekiel and try to make those angels, and they're not. We've got something popping out of the fire. We've got something standing with a sword over Jerusalem. We've got a number of different things. For example, we have whoever Gabriel and Michael are battling the prince of Persia, which at that time would have consequently probably been Xerxes. But then we ask the question, was that prince actually a hierarchical fallen angel? Okay. Now, the reason I bring this up is because even when we studied this parasha before and we kind of established all these things, we have an issue, and I'm going to show you what it is. Vayishlach, the actual parasha name, is the result of verse 3, and it is translated in the English as Jacob sent. But this is what I want you to see. Verse 3, Malachim. Verse 1, Malachi, which is basically, for lack of better words, I'll just say that it's the construct of Malachim. A construct basically is a Hebrew grammar trick for saying of. So this is Malachi Elohim, or agents of Elohim. But then in this one, it says he sent Malachim ahead of himself. Same word. In fact, if I go here, you will see that it actually is the exact same word in 32:1 and 32:3, 32:6. Okay. Interesting enough, though, when we jump into this particular verse in 6, it says Malachim, right? Malachim, the angels, right? And it's not the messengers of Jacob, right? It's just messengers. And so what's interesting is we have verse 1, verse 3, and verse 6 all saying the same word, malach. So this is interesting because in verse 1, we call them angels, but in verse 3, we call them messengers. By what right? And which is which? By what right do the Christian theological translators change it to messengers versus angels. Now, what does it say in the complete Jewish?
It says Yaakov sent messengers.
Okay, and what does it say in verse 1?
In verse 1, it says, angels.
Angels.
Yeah.
You see this? This is so. I want you to know, complete Jewish is very close to the Jewish publication. Mom, I believe you have a JPS Tanakh. What does it say in verse 1?
She's looking.
Okay.
What?
32:1.
2 in your book, maybe.
Wait a minute.
Oh,
32:1.
32:1.
Angels.
Okay. And what's it say in 3? In verse 3.
God. It says this is God's camp.
No, verse 3.
possibly 4. It's 4 in this book.
When he saw them, Jacob said, "This is God's camp."
No, verse 3 is, and he sent.
Could be 4 now.
Okay. Jacob sent messengers.
JPS
Messenger.
Tanakh, complete Jewish Bible, Christian Bibles, all distinguish between these two, and yet the same word is being used. We have a problem, don't we? Because what right have we to separate them? What right have we to try to make a distinction? See, this is an error on the part of the scribes, and the Christians went with it because of what they already had as what? Mythology integrated into the Catholic Church, right? Trying to make these cupids into messengers of God, giving them wings. Because why? Because the Ophanaim have wings, giving them authorities because they have some sort of higher purpose. But truth be told is when we lean to the evil side, we say, oh, we got demons, we got Satan, we got an evil actual like presence or energy, right? We've got hell itself, okay? But truth be told is that when we look at history, and I'm talking about recent history, we don't have that. We have humans making really bad decisions with their egos, and that's it.
What if what if they're making only that distinction because if it's a God messenger, if it's a messenger of God, then they're considering it an angel. But if it's a messenger of somebody else, like because it's Jacob, right? Jacob is sending he either sent out God's angels or he
See,
sent
now we're getting somewhere.
messengers, right? But one way or the other, they're making that distinguishment only because Jacob cannot be without fault. So they're placing some kind of evilness
Yes.
upon him.
So I'm going to tell you, okay. I don't know if it is Rabbi Hirsch's Tanakh, or if it is Kumash. It might be Rashi. We'll tell you there is no distinction. Jacob was commanding angels here. And that's why Esau sent 400 men, is because one angel equaled 400 men. but that's all the men that Esau had. Why would he send 400 warriors to Jacob if Jacob only sent messengers with a scroll? And then they return and they say, hey, just so you know, he's coming with 400 men. Right? This has been a great mystery throughout my life in my walk with Vayishlach until I understood some deeper things. And when we get into the rabbi's nugget, some of this will make more sense. However, the premise here is that angels were at Jacob's beck and call. Well, of course they were. He was given the dew of heaven. He had command over the dew of heaven, right? And what's interesting is how this reads, because we probably need to get in something a little deeper here. Angels of Elohim, not Yahweh. And there is a distinction. There is a Malachei Yahweh. There are angels of Yahweh. In fact, there is a Malach Yahweh, which is the angel of the Lord, right? But my point is do we encroach upon the fact that Psalm 82 calls us Elohim? And could we possibly say that Jacob has demonstrated something that we need to understand? And this question is actually going to be beautiful. Probably won't come up until like the second session. And of course, I want to keep an eye on time, but because we want to just do 90-minute sessions. But I want to look, he either encounters humans in this two camp thing and sends humans, or he encounters angels in this two camp thing and sends angels. But it can't be both. It can't be a separation within one verse. It's ridiculous that anybody would even think to translate it that way. Malachim, verse 6, Malachim. And why did those messengers have Esau turn around and send an army towards Jacob? So, Deb says, well, why can't it be both? Truth is it can. In fact, I'm just going to throw something out there. It can be that one is angels and one is men. But the problem that we have is Jacob didn't need angels for his dealings with Lavan. Why does he need angels for his dealings with Esau? Yes. This gets a little bit into last week's parasha as well, the ladder, and very specifically our discussions about if it wasn't DNA, that it was possibly him seeing his entire generation, right? Especially from the point of view that what Jacob wakes up and says, right?
Sorry, I'm looking for a verse real quick.
Okay. But you have something to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
But obviously Jacob's more afraid of Esau than he was ever afraid of Laban.
Mm-hmm.
He's afraid of the retaliation from Esau.
Mm-hmm. We'll definitely get into that discussion. So, like I said, I want to keep an eye on time. We've got probably about 25 minutes before our break. is there anything that indicates that Jacob would need extra help with Esau besides Jacob's own heart? Here's how I want you to think about it. Jacob has left Laban, and he is actually moving in a direction toward the land that was promised to his grandfather Abraham. Go ahead.
I think they were both afraid of each other.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, you got to consider that both of them split at a time where there's a lot of tension and all that stuff. So one goes out and makes his way, and one stays. So in my thinking, I would be wondering, well, what if Jacob is stronger than me now? And Jacob's thinking, what if Esau is a lot stronger than he used to be? So that's the way I look at it.
Okay. Thank you, Mom. Okay. So Mom is kind of indicating that maybe there's a double fear, and that's why Esau sends out Esau sends out his men, right? But I want to point some things out here. Okay. First of all, Jacob does not send men. It doesn't say he sent men, but it says Esau sent men. He doesn't send messengers. Okay. So I want for just a minute to kind of lean in the direction of Esau's philosophies and choices and Jacob's philosophies and choices. What do we know about Esau? What was he? He was a man of the field, right? And we also know that he was a mighty hunter.
We know that the word field is a parable to the world.
From Yeshua's interpretation of field, right? But furthermore, there's even more than that. And that is that we have the book of Yasher saying that Jacob, after he left Isaac and Rebekah and headed towards Padam Aram, that he encountered something that made him go and study under Shem, right? And study in the yeshiva of Shem, whereas Esau went and studied under who? Nimrod, and kills Nimrod and steals his dominion cloak, which was a cloak that made it possible for him to control animals and also made him a mighty hunter, right? And so we have now an interesting thing, because what garment does, according to the sages in the Midrash Rabbah, Jacob put on Esau's garment, and Isaac could not tell whether it was Jacob or not because of the darkness of the garment, right? And so then he blesses Jacob, and it needed to be that way because Isaac by rule was supposed to bless Esau, but he knew that he wasn't supposed to bless him. Now, I know that's a whole lot of stuff that's not in those verses in the 66 book compendium of the Bible. However, the folklore of peoples in anthropological circles is valuable regardless of whether or not the anthropologist believes it's true. In other words, what the Jewish people say about the things that are not in the scripture doesn't mean they're untrustworthy. You see, that's the problem that people have, is they go, oh, well, but the Bible's the word of God. Okay, who excluded the book of Yashar? Who says the book of Yashar does not belong? Right? And who excluded the book of Jubilees? Right? Who excluded the book of Enoch? And so we go to Ethiopia and we have the book of Yashar, the book of Enoch. We have other books in there. I think the book of Yashar. Anyways, point being, definitely the book of Enoch in the Ethiopian Coptic Bible as canon. So an anthropologist with an objective approach, if they're going to approach it objectively and not subjectively, they need to allow that folklore to exist. And so therefore we have this garment. Jacob puts it on, boom, this happens. Now Jacob goes and studies under Shem. Esau would have known about this. And I propose to you that it's very possible that where we need to go with this is a little bit deeper than just a sibling rivalry, because of a very specific verse. Let's go look at that verse now. Did you find your verse?
I didn't find it. I keep thinking of a.
Well, I'll tell you what.
I'm pretty sure it's in Psalms, but I can't find it. It's, and I'm using my memory. So, where it talks about angels being camped around the person who's saying the song.
Okay.
But it was just like, okay, I wanted to go back and see, but I can't find it right now. So
tell you what, let me take a quick shot at it. And if I can't find it, then we'll move on, because I definitely want you to have an opportunity to make your point. So definitely not anything in the NASB, nothing in the King James, no New King James, and definitely not anything in the NIV, which would be my thinking on common things. Surrounding, maybe encompass.
(34:7).
Psalm?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Psalm chapter 34, verse 7. Sorry, navigated to the wrong thing here. The angel of Yahweh encamps around those who fear him and rescues them. Is that the one?
I think so.
Okay. Let's just check the treasury of scriptural knowledge and just see if maybe we have a connection to other things in camp out. Okay, Genesis 32, 1 and 2, Zechariah 9, 8. But we also have Psalm 91, 11, 2 Kings 6, 17, 2 Kings 19, 35, Daniel 6, 22, Matthew 18, 10, Luke 16, 22, and of course Hebrews 1, 14. Now, it's interesting because Hebrews 1:14 gives us something very interesting. And not only that, but Hebrews, I'm going to tell you, the book of Hebrews is a very, very difficult book to accept that it is canonical. Now, let me explain. The book of Hebrews flat out uses Septuagint theology. Let me explain. The word angel itself is a direct transliteration of angelos. Angelos is theologically identified through Norse and Greek mythological creatures integrated into the Catholic Church. I want you to remember that the Catholic Church was highly influenced by Aristotle, right? by Hellenism, by Roman mythology, because you need to remember the Holy Roman Empire was a paganized Christian empire. You need to remember that we were not. So again, going back to anthropology, the Jews say that the manna did not fall on Saturday morning. What does that mean? That means that we accept their folklore. We accept that the seventh day is Saturday. We accept that Saturday or Shabbat is that day, not Wednesday, not Tuesday, not some other day. There are people who say that the Jews lied and it was Sunday, and they're ignorant, because I can tell you when and how it actually was changed at the Treaty of Milan. The Edict of Milan says, and I'm going to try to quote this word for word, but I may not get it perfect. All who are of the kingdom of Rome, be it known that all shall be idle and shall do no work on the venerated day of the sun, save the farmers who need to cultivate their fields. That is the commandment to worship on Sunday. And I can tell you, when he says venerated day of the sun, he is acknowledging the sun god. Okay. We're not talking about Helios here. We are talking about either Apollo, or we're talking about the Roman sun god. But the point is that he is actually saying that there is a day when we're supposed to worship the sun, and on that venerated day is when everybody is allowed to be remaining idle. So who changed it? And then I'm going to propose that it's very important that we realize that Constantine was not only an anti-Semitic and wrote a very scathing anti-Semitic letter to the Council of Nicaea, who consequently followed his lead and separated Jewish customs, the Passover, in which Yeshua died and rose from the dead upon, to Ishtar's day, the day of the venerated worship of Ishtar, a Babylonian infiltration into Roman Empire theology. Equating to what? And this is important. Equating to a concept that we are dealing with pagan theology, trying to put Olympic, very specifically Olympian theology has angels in it, winged messengers of Zeus who interfere or integrate themselves into and of course they're like fairies or something like that in that theology, but the same principle applies, that there are these assisters, as it were. So Hebrews is really interesting, and the reason I bring it up is because it's mentioned here in this treasure of scriptural knowledge. But let me just show you something really quick, because a lot of people who are messianic, and specifically Monty Judah, right, of Lion is Lamb Ministries, says Hebrews does not belong in the New Testament. Hebrews should not even be a part of the Bible. And I'm going to show you why he thinks that, just really quick, bring this up, and then after that, we'll take a break. Uh-oh, crashed. Doesn't like all that tap. Book of Hebrews, chapter 1. God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers in the prophets, in the many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he has also made the world. And he is the radiance of his glory and exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power. When he had made purification of sins, he sat down at the right hand of majesty on high, having become so much better than the angels, to the extent that he has inherited a more excellent name than they. For which of the angels did he ever say, "You are my son, today I have fathered you"? And again, I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. And when he again brings the firstborn into the world, he says, "And let all the angels of God worship him." And regarding angels, he says, he makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. But regarding his Son, he says, "Your throne, O God, is forever and ever, and the scepter of righteousness is the scepter of his kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated lawlessness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with oil of joy above your companions. And you, Lord, in the beginning laid the foundations of the earth, and the heavens are the works of your hands. They will perish, but you will remain, and they will wear out like a garment, and like a robe you will roll them up. Like a garment you will also they will also be changed. But you are the same, and your years will not come to an end. But to which of the angels has he ever said, 'Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet'? Are they not ministering spirits sent to provide service for the sake of those who will inherit salvation?" Now, the reason I read you this is because this is kind of a core process of information regarding the Trinity, right? But also positioning angels as these entities that are beyond human, right? So, first of all, let me just say this. I think Hebrews was written in Hebrew and probably does not read the way the Greek has copied it. I think there's been a lot of translation issues with Hebrews, and I think that that has been probably somewhat intentional. Let me tell you why. The book of Hebrews was Marcion's favorite book. And I will propose to you that where there is smoke, there is probably fire. And what I mean by that is that if you look into that context of what Marcion taught, and book of Hebrews is his champion, and he was a Greek expert and not a Hebrew expert. In other words, he swore by the Septuagint. He believed the Septuagint was the only faithful translation, right? In fact, I think in some place he even mentions that the Vulgate is inferior to the Septuagint. If it wasn't the Vulgate, it might have been the Peshitta. Anyways, his point is he thinks that the Greek is the end all, but then he swears by Hebrews. He, first of all, just so you know, he's who came up with the New Testament canon, which the Catholic Church kept, even after he became labeled a heretic. But what you need to know is the Church of Marcion was huge. We're talking Joseph Smith level, okay? He had so many followers that when he was labeled a heretic, the church lost a huge chunk of their people. Marcion believed there were two gods, a God of the Old Testament and a God of the New Testament. And he believed that the God of the New Testament was the actual original creator, and the God of the Old Testament was actually something called a demiurge, which was actually this entity who was malevolent. Where did he get that idea? Is there a malevolent, mischievous being in Greek mythology? In Norse mythology? Oh, wait, there is, right? Loki. And so the premise is that when we, and there are equivalents throughout the theologies. For example, Babylonian has one, right? Even built into the Zoroastrian religion, which is monotheistic, there is a mischievous, manipulative entity trying to cause harm, right? Okay, so why is this so important? Because if Hebrews was his hero book in the Greek, I propose to you that we should be very cautious with that book. Now, I'll tell you, a lot of my theology concerning the Old Testament comes from the book of Hebrews. For example, the blood of bulls and goats never offers a remission of sin. Anthropologically, what do we find? We find that they did not believe that sacrifice was about the remission of sin, but instead table fellowship. You ate your sacrifice with God, right? Okay, so the reason I bring this up is because there's an insight in Hebrews about these malachim, if we can even call them that, because angelos could very possibly be a very different word. However, the 70 Jews or the Septuagint Jews who translated from Hebrew the Old Testament. Oh, by the way, that's one of Marcion's terms, because he was trying to make it as if it was last will and testament, and the New Testament was going to be a switcheroo on everybody. Guess what? That's in Hebrews as well. That there would be a testator, and that testator would have to die, and therefore that will would be activated, but only until they died. And then the idea that maybe it was like a codicil or a modification of the other covenants, which kind of stems from covenantal theology, which of course is big on the book of Hebrews. But here we are in the book of Hebrews saying these things are ministering spirits to those who would inherit salvation. Now, for a Christian, a normal Christian, just a straight up run-of-the-mill Joe Schmo sitting in the pew on Sunday morning, hears that, thinks to himself, well, I'm saved, so angels must minister to me. Well, what if Jacob had the same sentiment? Because one of the things we can establish is that if Jacob was in covenant with Yahweh, the only way you could be in covenant with Yahweh was through Yeshua. So then we arrive at a big question. Does the book of Hebrews seem to indicate that they are spirits? Oh, but does that eliminate men? Yes and no. Here's the problem. Esau sends men, not messengers. Why does he send men? This is the part that is so important here. Why does Jacob send messengers, whether it's malachim with wings or it's malachim as in specially anointed men, possibly from this camp of prophets, right? So if we could establish that a prophet was a messenger, would that help? Possibly. But then, of course, Hebrews says he doesn't talk through the prophets anymore, which is another problem we have with the book of Hebrews, right? Because we can see Paul saying, oh, wait, you're supposed to prophesy above speaking in tongues. And for y'all charismatic folk, that's lost in translation. Speaking in tongues is prophecy. But as we move into this break, one of the things I want you to think about is there a bigger picture here? I tell you what, I'm gonna wait on this other verse until after our break. Okay. So for those of you who cannot make it to the second session, I'll say Shabbat Shalom. And for those of you who are staying, we'll be back in probably about 30 minutes. Shabbat Shalom.